Buenas noches. Buenas noches. Hoy, directo a la lectura, sin mamadas, sin saludo, sin nada. Vamos a la chingadazos. ¿Dónde me quedé? Throw. So he tortured himself, fretting himself with questions and finding a kind of enjoyment in it. And yet all these questions were not new ones, suddenly confronting him. They were old, familiar aches. It was long since they had first begun to grip and rend his heart. Long, long ago, his present anguish had its first beginnings. It had waxed and gathered strength, had matured and concentrated until it had taken the form of a fearful, frenzied, and fantastic question, which tortured his heart and mind, clamoring insistently for an answer. Now, his mother's letter had burst on him like a thunderclap. It was clear that he must not now suffer passively, worrying himself over unsolved questions, but that he must do something, do it at once, and do it quickly. Anyway, he must decide on something, or throw up life altogether. He cried suddenly, in a frenzy. Accept one's lot humbly as it is. Once for all, stifle everything in oneself, giving up all claim to activity, life, and love. Do you understand, sir? Do you understand what it means when you have absolutely nowhere to turn? Marmeladov's question came suddenly into his mind. For every man must have somewhere to turn. He gave a sudden start. Another thought he had had yesterday slipped back into his mind, but he did not start at the thought recurring to him, for he knew he had felt beforehand. He gave a sudden start. Another thought that he had had yesterday slipped back into his mind, but he did not start at the thought recurring to him, for he knew he had felt it beforehand, that he must come back. He was expecting it. Besides, it was not only yesterday's thought. The difference was that a month ago, yesterday even, the thought was a mere dream, but now it appeared not a dream at all. It had taken a new, menacing, and quite unfamiliar shape, and he suddenly became aware of himself. He felt a hammering in his head, and there was darkness before his eyes. He looked round hurriedly. He was searching for something. He wanted to sit down and was looking for a seat. He was walking along the K Boulevard. There was a seat about 100 paces in front of him. He walked towards it as fast as he could, but on the way, he met with a little adventure which absorbed all his attention. Looking for the seat, he had noticed a woman walking some 20 paces in front of him. But at first, he took no more notice of her than the other objects that crossed his path. It happened to him many times going home not to notice the road by which he was going. He was accustomed to walk like that, but there was, at first sight, something strange about the woman in front of him that grabbed his attention. I don't know. It says that gradually his attention that gradually his attention was riveted upon her. Riveted. What the fuck is... I don't know. I want to look it up. Upon her. At first, reluctantly and as it were resentfully, and then more and more intently. He felt a sudden desire to find out what it was that was so strange about that woman. In the first place, she appeared to be a girl quite young. She was walking in the great heat bareheaded. She was walking in the heat bareheaded and with no parasol or gloves. Parasol. Is it just like an umbrella or something? But I was waving her arms about in an absurd way. She had on a dress of some light silky material, but put on strangely airy. I don't know what that means, but I'm not looking up words today. We're just raw dogging. Not properly hooked up, and torn open at the top of the skirt, close to the waist. A great piece was rent and hanging loose. A little kerchief was flung about her bare throat, but lay slanting on one side. The girl was walking unsteadily. I didn't put a fucking timer. I did this to myself. 15 minutos de chingo. Y es tarde y estoy cansado. ¿Dónde me quedé? Kerchief standing on one side. The girl was walking unsteadily too, stumbling and staggering from side to side. She drew Raskolnikov's whole attention at last. He overtook the girl at the seat, but on reaching it, she dropped down on it. In the corner, she let her head sink on the back of the seat and closed her eyes, apparently in extreme exhaustion. Looking at her closely, he saw at once that she was completely drunk. It was so strange and shocking sight. He could hardly believe that he was not mistaken. He saw before him the face of a quite young, fair-haired girl. 16, perhaps not more than 15 years old. A pretty little face, but flushed and heavy-looking and, as it were, swollen. The girl seemed hardly to know what she was doing. She crossed one leg over the other, lifting it indecorously, and showed every sign of being unconscious that she was in the street. Raskolnikov did not sit down, but he felt unwilling to leave her and stood facing her in perplexity. This boulevard was never much frequented, and now, at 2 o'clock, in the stifling heat, it was quite deserted. And yet, on the further side of the boulevard, about 15 paces away, a gentleman was standing on the edge of the pavement. He, too, would apparently have liked to approach the girl with some object of his own. He, too, had probably seen her in the distance and followed her, but found Raskolnikov in his way. He looked angrily at him, though he tried to escape his notice, and stood impatiently biding his time till the unwelcome man in rags should have moved away. His intentions were unmistakable. The gentleman was a plump, thickly set man, about 30, fashionably dressed, with a high color, red lips, and mustaches. Raskolnikov felt furious. He had this sudden longing to insult this fat dandy in some way. He left the girl for a moment and walked towards the gentleman. Hey, you, Spidrigal. Hey, you, Svidrigailov. What do you want here? He shouted, clenching his fist and laughing, spluttering with rage. What do you mean? This gentleman asked sternly, scowling in haughty astonishment. Get away, that's what I mean. How dare you, you low fellow? He raised his cane. Raskolnikov rushed at him with his fist. Raskolnikov rushed at him with his fist, without reflecting that this stout gentleman was a match for two men like himself. But at that instant, someone seized him from behind, and a police constable? I don't know. Like, just a police officer, I guess? And the police constable stood between them. That's enough, gentlemen. No fighting. Please. No fighting, please, in a public place. What do you want? Who are you? He asked Raskolnikov, sternly noticing his rags. Raskolnikov looked at him intently. He had a straightforward, sensible, solidarily face. Solidarily face, with gray mustaches and whiskers. You're the man I want, Raskolnikov cried, catching at his arm. I am a student, Raskolnikov. You may as well know that too, he added, addressing the gentleman. Come along, I have something to show you. And taking the policeman by the hand, he drew him towards the seat. Look here, hopelessly drunk. And she has to... Okay. Look here, hopelessly drunk, and she has just come down from the boulevard. There is no telling who and what she is. She does not look like a professional. And it's more likely she has been given drink and deceived somewhere for the first time. You understand? And they've put her out into the street like that. Look at the way her dress is torn and the way she's been put on. She has been dressed by somebody. She's not dressed herself. And dressed by unpracticed hands, by man's hands. That's evident. And now look there. I don't know that dandy with whom I was going to fight. I see him for the first time. But he too has seen her on the road, just now, drunk, not knowing what she's doing. And now he's very eager to get hold of her, to get her away somewhere while she is in this state. That's certain. Believe me, I am not wrong. I saw him myself watching her and following her, but I prevented him. And he was just waiting for me to go away. Now he has walked away a little and is standing still, pretending to make a cigarette. Think how can we keep her out of his hands? And how are we going to get her home? The policeman saw all in a flash. The stout gentleman was easy to understand. He turned to consider the girl. The policeman bent over to examine her more closely, and his face worked with genuine compassion. Ah, what a pity, he said, shaking his head. Why? She's quite a child. She's been deceived. You can see that at once. Listen, lady, he began addressing her. Where do you live? The girl opened with weary and sleepy-looking eyes, glazed blankly at the speaker, and waved her hand. Here, said Raskolnikov, feeling in his pocket and finding 20 kopecks. Here, call a cab and tell them to drive her to her address. The only thing is to find out her address. Missy. Got a missing. ¿Qué sabes tú del mate, bolu? ¿Qué sabes tú del... Got a missing. The policeman began again, talking to the money, taking the money. I'll fetch you a cab and take you home myself. Where shall I take you, eh? Where do you live? Go away, they won't leave me alone, the girl muttered, and once more waved her hand. Atch, how shocking. It's shameful, missy, what a shame. He shook his head again, shocked, sympathetic, and indignant. It's a difficult job, the policeman said to Raskolnikov, and as he did so, he looked him up and down in a rapid glance. He, too, must have seemed a strange figure to him, dressed in rags and handing him money. Did you meet her far from here? He asked him. I tell you, she was walking in front of me, staggering just here in the boulevard. She has only just reached the seat and sank down on it. Ah, the shameful things that are done in the world nowadays. God have mercy on us. An innocent creature like that, drunk already. She's been deceived, that's a sure thing. See how her dress has been torn too? Ah, the vice one sees nowadays. And as likely as she is not belongs to gentlefolk too. Poor ones maybe. There are many like that nowadays. She looks refined too, as though she were a lady. And he bent over her once more. Perhaps he had daughters growing up like that, looking like ladies and refined, with pretensions to gentility and smartness. The chief thing is, Raskolnikov persisted, to keep her out of this scoundrel's hands. Why should he outrage her? It's as clear as day what he's after. Ah, the brute. He's not moving off. Raskolnikov spoke aloud, pointing to him. The gentleman heard him, and seemed about to fly into a rage again, but he thought better of it. He confined himself to a contemptuous look. He then walked away. He then walked slowly another 10 paces away and again halted. Keep her out of her hands, we can, said the constable thoughtfully. If only she'd tell us where to take her. But as it is, Missy, hey Missy, he bent over her once more. She opened her eyes fully, all of a sudden looked at him intently, as though realizing something, got up from the seat and walked away in the direction from which she had come. Oh, shameful wretches, they won't let me alone, she said, waving her hand again. She walked quickly, though staggering as before. The dandy followed her, but along another avenue, keeping his eye on her. Keeping his eye on her. No me quedé. Don't be anxious. I won't let him leave her. I won't let him have her, sorry, the policeman said resolutely. And he set off after them. Ah, the vice one sees nowadays, he repeated aloud, sighing. As that moment, something seemed to sting Raskolnikov. At that moment, something seemed to sting Raskolnikov. In an instant, a complete revulsion of feeling came over him. Hey here, he shouted after the policeman. The latter turned around. Let them be. What is it to do with you? Let her go. Let him amuse himself? He pointed at the dandy. What is it to do with you? The policeman was bewildered and stared at him open-eyed. Raskolnikov laughed. Well, ejaculated the policeman with a gesture of contempt, and he walked after the dandy and the girl, probably taking Raskolnikov for a madman. On something even worse, he has carried off 20 kopecks. Raskolnikov murmured angrily when he was left alone. Well, let him take as much from the other fellow to allow him to have his girl, and so let it end. And why did I want to interfere? Is it for me to help? Have I any right to help? Let them devour each other alive. What is it to me? How did I dare to give him 20 kopecks? Were they mine? In spite of those strange words, he felt very wretched. He sat down on the deserted seat. His thought strayed aimlessly. He found it hard to fix his mind on anything at the moment. He longed to forget himself altogether, to forget everything, and to then wake up and begin life anew. Poor girl, he said, looking at the empty corner where she had sat. She will come to herself and weep, and then her mother will find out. She will give her a beating, a horrible, shameful beating, and then maybe turn her outdoors. And even if she does not, the Darvia Fansovnas will get wind of it, and the girl will soon be slipping out on the sly here and there. I'll just leave it there.